Is America great again yet? I can't tell. This is Corey, and this is the O The Anthem podcast.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Rob. Welcome to episode 321 of the O The Anthem podcast, coming to you from all over the city yet again. But thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for listening on your podcatcher of choice. The easiest way, anchor.fm/O The Anthem.
Yep, and of course, if you're watching right now, you're probably watching live, whether that's on Twitch, on Facebook, on Twitter via Periscope, or directly on YouTube at all those sources at O The Anthem. Make sure you follow us there so you get notifications when we go live. And of course, no matter what, we bring out new content every single week. Whatever it takes, we're here with new content, even when it seems like perhaps my building may get burned down by the end of the podcast.
Pussy-ass curfew be damned.
So, Corey,
yes.
Up first, we're back remote. I put in the caption to the episode, just when you think we get out, they push us back in. So, do you want to explain to everybody what's going on?
Los Angeles is one of the many cities in the country that is currently on some form of curfew or lockdown. And it's annoying because they keep changing it every single day. Like, I got 3 Amber Alert messages, like the same message you get when you get an Amber Alert, going like curfew at 7, and then like 20 minutes later it was like curfew at 6, and it's like curfew now. And then another message from like Garcetti was trying to get out, going like no, it's 6, it's not now. But like at like 4:30, I was just like, oh, so everyone go home? Is that?
Corey, I have an update. I'm not sure if you could see what's happening here at my location, but this may be why we're under quarantine once again. As you can see, there's a vehicle burning behind me. It appears to be... Oh, wait. That's a NYPD van. Okay, so maybe it's not directly behind me.
Maybe it's not you.
It could be another problem.
Maybe it's some sort of trickery that's going on.
But yes, so a little bit of unknown. We actually were at the hashtag OTA LA studios over the weekend, and we got, what do you want to call it, curfewed in on Saturday night, and almost got curfewed in on Sunday night because of another project that we're working on that will be out in a few weeks. We were trying to wrap that up, and just like today, as Corey explained, they kept bumping up the curfew time while we were working, and right. Just like, all right, we got to call it. Let's get out of here and go do something else. So we got back, and then today seemed like it was pretty calm. But then maybe I was at work and I wasn't actually
keeping abreast of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like there was as much lawlessness today in LA. It seemed like things remained pretty peaceful for the most part.
Yeah, and it's confusing. I don't know why the curfew? Why are we pushing the curfew if earlier today the mayor was talking about releasing some of the National Guard troops back to their homes? Why are we going under curfew yet again?
I imagine that they're going to sort of be like working their way out of the curfew. If I can imagine, it's just that their thought process is that if it's just one day the curfew isn't there, then that's everyone's excuse to go out.
Yeah,
whereas
true.
if there's like, hey, we're gonna let the National Guard go and we'll be fine, and we'll just do it with the LAPD, then maybe people go out but protest less because they feel like there's not the government watching them kind of aspect of it. I also think that maybe sending the National Guard back is part of a thing to thwart Trump and his desire to send the military into major American cities, but we'll get to that later. Get to that part of the conversation. I think what really is amazing to me is that we last recorded on Sunday last week, so it's 8 days ago. 7 days ago is when George Floyd was murdered by the police.
Yes.
So since we've last recorded, we've been pretty much going through all this in real time with you guys. So this is our first opportunity to catch up since then. First thing, I something we talked about a little bit. I figured it would be good for the audience to hear. The officer who did the kneeling on the neck of George Floyd has been charged with third-degree murder. So far, none of the other officers have been charged with anything. Why what is the legal justification for going for third-degree murder as opposed to first or second-degree murder?
So yeah, and I think it was the ride to the studio on Saturday where we discussed this in kind of in depth. But I agree. I think it's very important that we discuss this because one of the calls in Minneapolis is, to arrest the other officers, which obviously should happen. And I do want to point out for everybody, something I brought up to Corey over the weekend, that a new video came out after the fact. And in that video, it's not just the kneeling on the neck, which, by the way, there were 3 officers plus 1 who was doing crowd control, 3 of them kneeling directly on him. But once they got him up and into the car, then we saw a video of them basically holding the doors open and punching and kicking him while he's in the back of the car.
Yeah.
And maybe that was because he was in the process of cardiac arrest and just trying to get some attention and nobody was giving him attention. I saw another video, completely unrelated, but during the protest now, of a group of 2 NYPD officers trying to get a suspect down. And they had his head pinned under the wheel of a car, the tire of a car. And so because of that, he could not roll over in the direction that they were trying to roll him over. And they treated it like he was fighting them. So one of them just pulled out their revolver and shot him in the chest. And then after the shot goes off, he goes limp. And basically they could turn him wherever they wanted. And they roll him over and they lock him up. And I was reminded when I saw that video that who knows what was going on in the back of that car.
Yeah.
But there is a high likelihood that he was in distress.
I'll tell you one thing, and I don't know. The problem with the laws around policing in this country is that we don't know anything from the police side of things yet. And one of the things, certainly from that video where you were talking about, where it looked like the officer was basically punching him with the door open.
Yeah.
But you couldn't quite tell what the action was behind the door, but it looked like some sort of physical altercation.
Much like the screen right now, this is what we saw. Wait, let me see if I can get it in here. We saw...
Yeah. So we don't know what's on the other side of that.
Yeah. I can make assumptions that, you don't just punch the air.
But I mean, like, when I was watching that, one of the other cops who was acting as a lookout basically had his body camera perfectly pointed at what was going on. So, I mean, under a reasonable assumption, if that body cam is rolling, which it should be because, they were in the middle of a stop, we would have a pretty good view of what happened right there. Mm-hmm. But then here's the other problem. And I feel like something that collectively people who are protesting this should try and push for a little bit more. We pay for the body cameras. We pay for, uploading the footage to some sort of cloud storage. And the cops get to decide which ones we get to see. The prosecutors get to decide which ones we see.
To be fair, in Baltimore, we also pay for the guy to edit the footage and then record it on his cell phone and then release it. So,
Yeah.
Just check out Undisclosed Freddie Gray for more on that one. That was enlightening. It's to me, it just seems like we should be able to basically watch any body cam at any time. Like, we should be able to just make like a Freedom of Information Act request and it's automatically granted because this is taxpayer money going towards this. Much the same as it's taxpayer money going towards all the police that are on the street right now, way more than ever, because they need to have a huge show of force to make people think twice about police violence, I guess. I never understood this part of it either.
Nothing like police brutality at the protest against police brutality. Sends a message.
I keep looking out and seeing like lines of 5 or 6 police cars like all driving together. Maybe sometimes as much as like 10 or 15 police cars just like driving in a line to whatever they're going to. And all I can think of anytime I see it is like how much I don't want to see the police right now. How much it's like, like when you're mad at your like, it's not a perfect example, but if you're like mad at your girlfriend and you're just like, I don't want to see you for like a day, like
give me a break, give me some time.
I'm gonna have a guys' night tonight. I don't want to see you. Like, that's how I feel about the police right now. I don't want to see you right now, and yet you're everywhere.
Sounds like they're every day of my life. I don't know. But so back to the main topic, which is third-degree murder. So obviously the rest of the officers should be charged, and what I'm about to say may be changed by, as Corey pointed out, the body cam footage of what happened in the back of the car. But based on the footage that we have seen thus far, which is just the footage of what happened in the street, law in Minnesota, and I guess I'll preface this by saying I am a qualified attorney in so much as I have gone to law school and passed the bar. However, I have not practiced law, especially defense law, in about 5 years. So I suppose take that with a grain of salt, if you will. However, it is my understanding.
And you don't know Minnesota law exactly.
100%.
Yeah.
I am barred only in the state of Maryland, nowhere else. I certainly don't know Minnesota law. I only know that I have an ability more than maybe Corey or other people to read a law and understand what that's actually supposed to mean.
Mm-hmm.
So I did review the Minnesota statute on murder, and my understanding it is this way, that in some states, there are different charges of degrees, meaning first-degree murder and second-degree murder are separate charges. However, other states treat it as there are degrees of a charge, meaning murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree. Now, the problem is with Minnesota and with other states that first degree murder requires two exacerbating circumstances. Number one, that you have pre-planned, even if it was only, I think that they've gone down to even like in the moment. Like we get into an argument, Corey walks away, and then I see a pipe on the ground, and I look at Corey and I realize I could clock him with that pipe and never have to worry about this again.
Yeah.
So now I grab the pipe and pursue and hit him. That's enough pre-planning. So it doesn't have to be like, Ocean's 11 for it to be pre-planning. It could just be a minimal amount. But pre-planning, and you have to have the intent to kill or the intent to maim that might bring forward killing. So
Yeah.
again, using the example of the pipe and Corey, I don't know that clocking him in the head with a metal pipe will kill him. But I should know that at best, it is going to cause a grievous injury that could lead to his death.
Yeah, or enough so that you would, if it did kill me, you wouldn't be surprised, and you would expect that murder charges would be brought in that sort of situation.
Right. I throw a pillow at Corey, and it breaks his neck, and he dies. Now I'm in a zone of like, well, one, I didn't intend harm, and two, there really shouldn't have been an expectation of that harm.
Yeah.
Once we got there. But it just so happens that in this case, he has a very fragile neck, and by hitting him with the pillow, I caused his death. Well, that's where we get to third degree. Third degree murder.
So isn't excuse me here, but I mean, like, isn't there like an eggshell doctrine in like a Supreme Court ruling somewhere where it's like just because you're seen as like a fragile individual doesn't necessarily give you an exemption if you accidentally kill somebody?
So it's actually exactly the opposite, and it's in torts, not in criminal law. The eggshell defendant says that you take the defendant as you find him. So if I have a defendant who, due to a birth defect, has a weak neck, and I give him a shove, and that shove to Corey might cause no damage or very little, that this defendant, it causes a spinal rip or a spinal break and months of rehabilitation. Well, too bad. You now are on the hook for that because you caused the damage. And the tort was me pushing you. Now, Corey could sue me, and he might get some relief. Most likely, this is one of those cases that Corey would get $1, where the jury would be like, listen, he didn't really suffer any injury, but yes, he did. He acted negligently.
Wronged.
Yes, he was wrong, and now we're going to give you a symbolic $1 for that. So in torts, you have to take your defendant as they are. But we ignore that when it comes to the criminal law because it's about actual harm. If I pushed you and no harm had come to it, you couldn't go to the police and argue like, well, if I had a neck injury, that could have killed me. Like, no, that's not how it works.
Right.
But if you do have a neck injury and I shove you, I am still responsible for the results of that.
Gotcha.
So, third degree is generally what we now consider depraved heart murder. It was actually one of two causes of murder under the old English system, where it doesn't require pre-planning and it doesn't require an intent to kill. What it basically means is you acted negligently or with wanton disregard for the safety or health of others. In the specific murder case, it's wanton disregard for human life. And that is a very English phrase, which essentially just means The way you acted was negligently, or you acted so out of bounds to the way a normal person would act. And you did so knowing that an injury may result, which might result in death, and you did it anyway. So the big question that's come up in this Minneapolis case is the difficulty of intent. And can you prove that when the officer knelt on George Floyd's neck, that he intended to kill him? And that is a very, very difficult thing to prove, especially with a peace officer acting in the bounds of his duties, essentially. And the risk of charging first-degree murder is that you've now charged murder in the first degree. Now, a jury could possibly include third-degree murder as a lesser included offense, but generally they don't. They will step down from murder to manslaughter, and then from manslaughter down to voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, and then acting reckless under the color of law. So what a prosecutor is looking at is, if I try first-degree murder, I have to show there was some pre-planning and that his intent was to kill. And if I do have to show both of those things and I can't, it's far more likely that the jury will go to manslaughter, which I believe in Minnesota is like a 15 to 30 or 10 to 25, as opposed to murder, which is 40 to life in any degree.
Yeah.
So if I go with third degree murder, the penalty is still the same as first degree murder, but the bar is far lower because I don't have to show intent.
Yeah.
And so it makes a lot of sense to charge this as third-degree murder instead. I don't care what the officer intended to do. What I can say is that 9 out of 10 people, or 99, maybe 90 out of 100 people, who I tell them to kneel on the neck of someone would say, I'm not going to do that because that guy might get hurt. That's all you really have to show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this case, too, it's just 12 of 12 you need to convince.
And that is really what it comes down to, is you have to show 12 people on a jury that he acted in a way that was out of bounds for human decency to another human being. And with that bar so very low, there's a higher likelihood of conviction at the top level. Now, if you fail at third-degree murder, you can still step down to manslaughter. But it's so much easier to prove third-degree murder at that point, that it's just a wanton disregard for human life.
Well,
go ahead.
Right now, do you think that the charges are for the purposes of, like, basically saying they charged him with something, and there would be more that would come on the docket later, or?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, this is a Mosby move, if you want to start classifying it as that.
Yeah,
it's a Mosby move. This was, let's try and charge him with something that we know we can make stick, so that everybody calms down. What they didn't take into account... Good job. Yeah. What they didn't take into account is, one, why don't you charge the other 4 guys? Because if you're moving under third-degree murder, every person who kneeled on his back had the same wanton disregard for human life. Now, they were hidden by the vehicle, so they're not on the video. But you know who they are.
Yeah.
And we know who they are. And we're going to pretend that that's not the case. So... it's something that you brought up actually on Saturday, that like where this could have been a pressure release, the way that it was in Baltimore, all 6 were charged on the same day, and Marilyn Mosby trots out there and says, we are going to get justice for Freddie. There is going to be justice. Let's not take this to a violent place on the street. Minneapolis instead charged one of them, and rather than getting this big pressure release, it actually caused the pressure to rise, because everyone else is saying now, what about these other guys?
Yeah, and
by the way, you know who the district attorney is in Minneapolis? Oh, I'm sorry, not district attorney, the attorney general?
Keith Ellison.
Keith Ellison. Yeah, why do we know that name, Corey?
Because he was running for the head of the DNC. He was a Bernie-crat, if you will, running for the head of the DNC. And the same one that had Pete Buttigieg, too. Because it was Buttigieg, Ellison, and Tom Perez who eventually got the nod.
Yep. He was our pick, if I remember correctly.
Who, Keith Ellison?
Yep. As a man of color from a Midwest state.
Yeah, more on the progressive side of things.
Yeah.
I thought would have helped in the DNC, but they didn't go that way. But now he's in the Attorney General's office, which I didn't know. I thought he was still a congressman, but yeah, I mean, it at least seems like somebody who would be interested in properly charging this case will be in charge of it. But I've said that before about many district attorneys, and or state's attorneys, and I've been wrong before.
And just to clarify, he is the Attorney General of Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
So
I'm not trying to minimize his title. I was just...
Yeah, the state's attorney for the District of Minneapolis, in a way, reports to him, in a way doesn't, because it's also an elected position. But it's like, Keith, I know that Keith Ellison is on the phone with that guy in Minneapolis. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
And he said as much on CNN this morning, so hopefully.
Well, they had a thing, too, where... apparently there was some sort of conflict of interest inside of the prosecutor's office that would have kept them from handling this case properly, which is always something you want to hear when it comes to a police violence case. But
I mean, listen, if you need any more evidence that these guys are all on the same team, how many cases do we have to hear about prosecutors dating cops and that they are then somehow recusing themselves from a case when it involves police violence? But you know when they don't recuse themselves? When it's your ass sitting in the defendant's seat and the guy who stopped you, the guy who arrested you, is the person that they're in a relationship with.
Yeah.
And I was a defense attorney for 5 years. And I can tell you one thing that I would never have done. I would not have gotten involved with a police officer. Because I think it would compromise my ability to represent clients if I have to worry or ask my client, somebody who they tell me this story and I get the way that I do. Now it's all guillotines and shutting down and marching to the sea. Back then it was all about like filing motions and actually believing that some change could actually happen in the system. And then that gets just railroaded by like, oh wait, who's your arresting officer? Oh, sorry.
That's my boyfriend.
Yeah, not going to be able to do that. I apologize. But let me just point you out to some people who are like, not as fired up about, taking on the police as I am, but I'm sure they'll give you a good representation.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I just want to do a quick update and
Still on fire?
Still burning. Everything looks like it's basically 2020 in a nutshell. Just one big old trash fire. So good to know. Back to LA. What's the next? Sorry, I'm looking through the
protest.
So we talked about a little bit about in that that people are still protesting in Minneapolis. It wasn't the pressure relief valve that we had discussed it maybe being. The problem is, and I mean, I think this is something very important to talk about, that not everybody who's out there is only out there because of George Floyd.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people whenever there's a thing like this where it gets co-opted by other sides. So there are certainly a lot of people out there who are just generally anti-police or anti-police violence. And I would say there's a lot of white people included in that group who are there, and young kids too. And I really think about it in terms of like where they might have been when Michael Brown got killed or something like that. You have to sort of think about like when these transcendent moments hit them, and if they were 13 at the time and now they're 21, then they're more likely to be inclined to go out and protest and rally and everything like that.
A bunch of the kids who work for me, who aren't kids, they're in their early 20s. We were talking today, and one of them asked, like, well, aren't you going to go out there and like start getting involved? And I was like, listen, it's not 2014 anymore. Like, it's not 2015. And it's weird for me to think that way, but like, I got a knee that needs rehabbing. Like, I'm in a long-term relationship now. It's not just about me making dumb decisions. So I have to make different decisions.
Well,
and I realize, though, that to your point, that they were in middle school when I was on the streets marching for Freddie Gray. These 20-year-olds were 14 when Michael Brown died. They were 14 or 15 when Freddie Gray died. Like, that is an insane notion to me.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I I see a lot of people sort of more from the Black Lives Matter end of the protest, sort of getting upset that there are people who are piggybacking on the movement that they're trying to create right now. And for the most part, Black Lives Matter has been very nonviolent in the way that they've been portraying this. But
we do have a comment. We have a comment in the stream to this effect. Ashley Boyer, coming in from, I believe, Delaware. What do you think about martial law? Do you think looters are protesting or looking for opportunities? And I mean, I think this is where you're going, Corey, right? That there are people taking advantage of what's going on out there.
Yes, but I also think that there can be a way that people are taking advantage of the situation and protesting something at the same time. Specifically here in LA, something that was interesting that didn't happen in previous riots that have happened throughout the city's history is that it seemed like there was more opportunity or opportunism about where certain protests were happening. So Beverly Hills got hit, Santa Monica got hit, right by the Grove got hit. Like, these are sort of areas where there's more things that somebody would want to steal. Like, you know, it makes a lot more sense to rob a Gucci store than it does to rob some, like, little electronic store, you know, or corner store in your neighborhood kind of thing, you know? So I think there has been a lot of people, most of what seems to be the violence or the fires or anything like that seems to be started by instigators who are trying to get involved. And, you know, there's also a part of this that I think that people have been locked up in their houses for a while, and they see people out on the street, and they see people doing destructive things, and then they think, oh, it's okay now. That's part of the problem, too. Like, if you remember on the night where Stephanie Rawlings Blake said we want to give them space to destroy.
But she never said that. What?
It did not, you know, it was pretty, it was contentious, but it wasn't violent at any point. And then as soon as the looting started, it really got kicked up. Like, as soon as one person broke a window, windows were breaking all over the place. And it's more of the thing of, like, I feel like there's a degree of criminality, which is, I'm going to do this if everyone else is doing it. You do it with speeding all the time. If everyone else on the road is going 80, then you're going 82, because you're doing that logic of, like, oh, well, who's the cop going to stop? All of us? Like, how are they going to get all 5 of the people going 80 miles an hour, you know? And I think there's some opportunism that's going on with people who are looting and, you know, causing property damage and stuff like that. And I don't condone it, but at the same time, I think that I try, especially right now, not judge people on the situations that they might be in, because some people who might be looting might be in the same situation that we make so often in, like, parables of the Bible. Like, is it wrong for a man to steal bread for his family? Like, if somebody has lost their job, they haven't been able to pay rent, their life is in a constant state of flux right now, and this is an opportunity to lash out at people that they feel have wronged them and, like, get something out of the deal. I can't say that I don't rationalize that somewhere on a base human level. Not that I would do it, but I understand how somebody could be driven to that point.
Ashley is on the East Coast. Thank you for joining us for the show, Ashley. We appreciate you coming in. Of course, everybody can join us. We can take comments live from either Facebook, from Twitch, from Periscope on Twitter. So feel free to send in your comments, and we'll display them right down at the bottom of your screen, where you can see the person's comments from all of those streams. I will say one thing: martial law. Corey and I, a little later on, are going to get into martial law, the Insurrection Act of 1807, and the Posse Comitatus Act, which are all very different things. So if you're having any interest in martial law, stick around to the end. And I'll say, you know, one thing. I sent Corey the first chapter from my as yet forthcoming book, which I think will be the most controversial of every book that I've ever published. And I pointed out there that in any situation like this, there are 3 types of people who are out right now. There are peaceful protesters who are in the vein of Gandhi or Martin Luther King, just trying to utilize the First Amendment, the right to peacefully protest, to peacefully assemble, to have free speech, to make their point known. Then there are always going to be, as Corey has pointed out, a second group, which are people who are taking advantage of a bit of the chaos that's going on. And in society, I've been pointing this out all weekend long, have wealth disparity that is unconscionable right now, and poverty levels are at the highest that they've been in the history of the world. We are the richest country to ever have existed in the history of the world, and we are also the ones with per capita, and looking at a spread of wealth disparity, have the poorest population given the wealth of the country. And it's unconscionable that that is a fact, but you tie in that systematic poverty, the systematic wealth disparity, with people being trapped inside for 2 months, and some of those people losing their jobs. And, I think most states have rent eviction statutes on right now where they can't be evicted, but Florida reopened their court and 13,000 evictions were made on the same day.
Yeah.
Like, that is what people are looking at. So there's a lot of desperation, there's a lot of anger. And that's where this group is coming in. It's people who are not politically minded to the most part, but they're angry and they want to express anger. And I'm not going to say it can't be condoned. The policy of the podcast is that no violence is to ever be condoned. I will make a separate video on my own channel, not associated with Corey whatsoever, where I will discuss my personal policy on violence. But I'll wrap that up with saying that there is a third group. There is a third group who is politically minded and is making a protest, but they are not following the guidelines of Martin Luther King or Gandhi. They are following the guidelines of early Malcolm X, of James Baldwin, of the Black Panthers from 1968, and saying, you do not have the ability to limit what I do as protest. And essentially the book that I'm working on is an educational, a critique of the notion that only the government has the right to use violence in a way that's acceptable. And we have to get ourselves out of that notion, because the reality is violence is a tool that can be used just like other tools in the repertoire. A policeman can use his baton, he can use pepper spray, he can use a taser, or he can use a gun, whether that's with rubber bullets or regular bullets. They can use tear gas. They have a repertoire they can use against you. You, as a protester, should feel as though you have a repertoire to use against them as well. But again, that is not the policy of the podcast. That's my personal policy. It is the foundational argument of the book that is coming out. So, but I think that everyone can agree that the burning aside, the looting is, things can be replaced, lies can't be replaced, and I'll continue to make that argument. But I would say,
as much as I dislike the idea of the looting and stuff like that, I do think there is a one of the things me and Rob were kind of talking about when we were watching footage of it on Saturday was, for some of these businesses, it's probably for the best, actually, that it happened, because they'll get huge insurance payouts that they are not getting right now, because insurance companies are fighting tooth and nail for companies or for businesses that have been closed from COVID, and trying to argue that this is not the state shutting down businesses, not their fault, and you didn't have pandemic insurance, so sorry for you, and all that sort of stuff.
And then, of course, we have the video out of Minneapolis where it appears as though it's a police officer, but there was an allegation that it was actually an employee of the AutoZone breaking the windows to encourage people to continue the violence.
Yeah.
Because, hey, they've been closed for 2 months, and this is a way that we can actually get an insurance payout. So it's not beyond the pale that might be a factor. We've seen videos from Seattle, videos from Oakland, videos from Atlanta and Miami, where it appears as though either the police or people who aren't really associated with the protest are kind of the ones starting the breaking of the windows, and then the people who are there to take advantage are like, well, that window's already broken, I'm just going to go in.
Well, that's one of the things that really kind of is bothering me about this whole situation, is that I want everyone to feel like they're welcome at a protest that, at the end, I think everyone has similar goals. everyone wants to put restrictions on police power and police violence. From the Black Lives Matter side of it, obviously there is more of a tilt towards the systematic racism that is involved in police violence, which is obvious and very clear. But I don't think that it necessarily takes away the value of the idea that cops, regardless of the inherent racism that they're showing, are still awful to everybody, regardless of race.
Yes.
Just because white people don't necessarily have the same stories of being treated, completely unconstitutionally and, being the focus of police attention as much. I feel like there's just as many stories that I've had with friends who are white who have, like the cop said I was going 50, but I didn't go over 50. And then I showed up to court and he lied in front of the judge and I didn't have anything to prove it wrong and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
I mean, listen, I've maintained for a long time they are the band of blue, not your department, but police officers as a whole are the largest gang and or domestic terrorist organization that we have. Several years ago, I got the direction of their ire, and I was getting pulled over 3 times a week for petty little stuff. But just, they were like, hey, I get paid the same no matter what, and if I can make you late for court or if I can inconvenience you somehow, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. And it's not to say that at the center of whatever the eventual solution that we all agree to is, shouldn't include a large amount of accommodations for the racial aspect of violent policing. But I think that to ignore that other people can feel the effects of an corrupt police department is not outside of the vein, And I think that while I would appreciate it if the more predominantly white protesters who seem to be causing damage would calm down with that a little bit, I also understand that everyone feels like they have a different path forward on this,
Yeah.
And when you have so many conflicting people who are all trying to get together under the same, banner of protest, it's going to get a little bit confused. Just look at Occupy. When
Yes.
Occupy started, and all of a sudden, every single person who had a view on how the economy should be changed was down there spouting their principles. At the end, if there is a moment where, there is a group of leaders from the protest and a group of leaders from government of some kind, whether it's local or state or federal or whatever, if there is a meeting, then I would hope that everyone is heard at this point,
Well, and people may remember that Occupy Baltimore, I was asked to leave and not return because I basically found a group of people who essentially were asking for the same thing, but couldn't see that they were. And I was like, listen, this is what we should ask for. You all can basically agree for that. So give me your proxy and then let's quiet some of the voices and I'll be the only one who speaks. And if you find out that I spoke wrongly and you don't agree with it, feel free to pull your proxy at any time. But
the through Vic Naraja defense.
But listen, so this way, a quarter of the audience, everyone standing on this side of the circle has one person speaking, and that will make an impact. And then I was asked to not return because I was organizing political parties inside of the movement, which apparently was frowned upon in this establishment. But let's do a quick check-in. Sorry, hang on, Corey. Let me check in.
Still on fire.
Still burning. Yeah. So, we've talked about a lot of the problems. I feel like the natural place to go from here is, where do we find the solution? Who can give us a solution?
Well, first of all, we need the pressure to come off the situation like ASAP. And the problem I find is that nobody at this particular moment seems prepared to be that person. For whatever people may think.
I am prepared. America, I am prepared. Listen, go out to your protest, chant my name, and let them know.
Say it 3 times and Rob will show up.
I'm like the candy man.
No, like obviously Trump is not prepared to lead in this moment at all, and like it seems like all the goodwill that some politicians have built up for how they've handled coronavirus is just immediately going out the door with how they're handling the protests. I couldn't, I was willing to defend Garcetti against almost any kind of criticism for a while there, and now I am ready to bury him at the bottom of that hall. Like
Newsom too. I mean, the both of them, honestly.
Newsom, I feel like the really weird thing about California politics is that because Newsom is a Northern California guy and he stays up in Sacramento and he's based in the northern part of California, there's almost like a separation between, it's like almost living in two states. It's like North and South Dakota, So I feel like sometimes when things happen in LA, like he doesn't quite grasp it the same as if it happened in San Francisco, because it's so much more real if he's there.
I got a solution.
Go ahead.
Cal exit. We just get out, and then basically we can have North and South Dakota, except for it's the state of Los Angeles, the state of Orange, the state of Riverside,
the state of San Diego.
State of San Diego, and then we just run our own, and Sacramento becomes the national capital, and the inevitability is Oregon joins us, Washington joins us, Nevada joins us, and when they do, by the way, Sacramento becomes a functionally centered capital, which does not happen on the North American continent.
That's very true.
Cal exit just it solves everything, really, as the preeminent position for benevolent dictator of the new California Republic, it'll still be a republic. It's the People's Republic of California. I must say, I think we should move in that direction.
Well, so specifically with the issues of the protests and stuff like that, if you were picked as the person to help negotiate a potential solution with Garcetti, right? You were voted the spokesman for the protest, and you're going to have a meeting with Garcetti to speak about what you think can help make realistic change today. What is on your list of demands? Do you think, like, where would you want to go if you were trying to make substantial change in sort of like the activist area of the coin?
So, I mean, this is the difficulty because he's taken some of the right steps. California is going to close all of our juvenile prisons. The idea that we're sticking children in prison and someone's making money off of that is unconscionable. That word's been used a lot today, but it's unconscionable. So he's taken that step in the right direction. I think that beyond that, though, there is more that can be done, but it can't be done today. Like, force the cities and the counties, when they renegotiate their collective bargaining agreements with the police officers, to say, no, we are not going to give you this. And you know what? I don't support calling out the National Guard. But if the police say, no, we're not accepting this agreement, and you don't understand, and Corey can tell you how much it's going to burn me to say this. The union is too strong, and we need to back them down. And if the police say, we're not accepting your agreement, we're going on strike, fine. Call out the National Guard just for, the biggest of crimes. Because what did we learn in New York and Baltimore when the cops went on strike? Crime goes down. So force them to the table to get some reasonable concessions about, I don't know, let us talk to you more than 15 or sooner than 15 days after an incident. Body cam footage is available to the public immediately. It's not the purview of the police. Anyone, and listen, I told people this week, I've been pushing for this since 2004. Corey, again, can back this. Insurance, private insurance for police officers. Stop making the public pay for all of those claims.
Well, there's also been talk about people who wanted to make the union and maybe the benefits of the union pay towards the potential judgments of an officer who got involved in something, as opposed to the state.
If you want to do that, that's one way to go. I don't think that you'll ever get the union to do that. So you either have to break the union or go a different way and say, fine, we're going to make you get private insurance. And when you become uninsurable, when they say too many incidents, too many payouts, we are not insuring you, you cannot be a police officer in California anymore. And you'll limit the number of bad cops just that way. But, I mean, I think that's a start. I also have the innate belief that we should have a statewide police database, let's say. And Corey, who lives in downtown Los Angeles, should never be assigned to downtown Los Angeles. He probably shouldn't be assigned to Los Angeles at all. He should go up to a neighborhood where he doesn't know. And then someone, let's say he's assigned to Oakland, California. Well, an officer from Oakland, California will be assigned to downtown LA, where he formerly lived. The idea being you invest in the neighborhoods that you are protecting, that you're an officer in, but you don't have those deep roots where it's like, I know that guy, I'm going to make this personal, or, you know, I'm going to let somebody off just because I know who they are. And by moving police around and making sure that they're, well, by the way, also more than 6 months of training. Can we try that? I had to go through 4 years of undergrad, 3 years of law school in order to understand the law. I do not hold police accountable for not knowing the law. I don't know all of the laws, and I'm a lawyer. Maybe more than 6 months of training, and maybe focus less on the guns. Okay, keep the guns because they already are bad enough shots. But also add in some legal training so that I as the governor, could send you out, here's an update to all the laws that changed in the last session that might impact you while you're out. And you can easily read this and understand how that changes what you do on the street. Those 4 steps, I think, by themselves.
There were a couple of things I was thinking about, too, in addition to that. I think one thing, I remember Mosby's office said something along the lines of, we have a list of 150 officers that we can't call because, you know, if they went on the stand as a witness, then they would just be ruined because of all the past problems that they have. If any person in any form of government, whether it's the police department or the state's attorney's office or anything, has a list of police like that, then they should all just be gone. I don't know why. I don't know why we are protecting people that can't be even serve as witnesses in trials for their police work. You know, like,
yeah. I mean, listen, if I was so incompetent that no one at my job could trust me on that job, I would not have my job anymore.
Right.
Why are we allowing that to continue with the people who are supposed to protect us?
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, beyond that, I think anything that taxpayer money goes towards should have open records to taxpayers as well. I can understand a small degree of officers having legal protections from being unmasked if there's allegations against somebody. Like, you know, obviously the same things that would happen if it's, you know, when we talked about Trump being involved in Cohen's thing, he was individual A in the brief.
Yeah.
You can write a report that says Officer A was accused of doing this, and then if the grand jury comes out and charges him with something, then you can unseal the name.
Yeah.
But, you know, like basic protection should apply, but I feel like the ones that keep officers from having to say anything for 7 months while they get their story together, and cities burn because we don't have any kind of ability to call on the officers to get their statement. If I was, just putting it in terms of a civilian, if I go out and murder Rob, then I could be brought into the police station that very night. They could find me 10 minutes after I did the murdering, pull me into the police station, ask me questions. If I didn't ask for a lawyer, then I could sit there and answer questions. But eventually, even if I do have a lawyer, I'm going to have to answer questions to somebody at some point.
Yep.
So,
or you have to go on the record saying, I am not going to answer those questions.
Right.
That's the difference, is the cops get to stay silent and don't get to say anything, and then later on put together a story that may or may not make sense.
Right.
After talking to other cops and other people. Like, if Corey goes in there and says, I want my lawyer, great. But then there is no statement by him, and the official position is he lawyered up, and for good or bad, people will take a sentiment from that. Same should be there for the police. If you really think you did nothing wrong and that it was all by the book, go in there and make a statement as such. And then we know. So there you go.
And I mean, beyond that, I feel like more civilian review boards would be good. more people who are
empowered
to be able to do things and maybe even sort of push internal affairs. Like I would very much like a citizen overview of internal affairs, because I feel like if there was somebody in Baltimore, for instance, who was looking at all the things that was happening in internal affairs, they would say, "Why don't you look at this one again?" Like, please. This Wayne Jenkins guy, I feel like he needs a quick look over.
Yeah,
it's not
just a
adding
brush
up
under the table. Yeah. So we originally started talking about this, and I actually, now that I see what's left, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But there's an issue called qualified immunity, and that is that certain people, when acting under the color of state authority, are immune from prosecution and or immune from private lawsuits about their actions.
As long as the action was viewed as reasonable to somebody within the same field. So, like, if another officer, or if 9 out of 10 officers would take the same shot that you did, then you have qualified immunity from that shooting, because everyone agrees that in that situation they would have done the same thing. If you just randomly walk into a 7-Eleven and start spraying bullets, then that's a completely different thing.
And one exception to that is if you are charged and the grand jury comes back with no true bill, or you go to trial and are acquitted, you are automatically afforded qualified immunity, because then a body has reviewed the evidence and said you acted reasonably. And that's where we get into a problem, because the rule generally is that a prosecutor can get a true bill against a ham sandwich if they really want to, because they are the only ones presenting evidence. They're the only ones who get to talk. So if a prosecutor doesn't want a true bill, they don't get one. And then the officer can say, well, you presented evidence to the grand jury. They said it was reasonable. So now I get qualified immunity from the family trying to collect.
Right.
But the reason that's in the news is because ironically, both the right and the left, the conservatives and the liberals, are attacking qualified immunity, and it looks like it's going to the Supreme Court. One side is saying qualified immunity doesn't go far enough. The other side is saying qualified immunity is protecting officers from situations in which they should be held accountable.
Right.
And it looks like the Supreme Court's going to hear that case, and then God help us, we'll have a decision. I can't imagine it's going to be one that I agree with based on the makeup of the court right now, but they have surprised me. So I suppose we'll have to wait and see.
There's a couple names on there. I mean, so Clarence Thomas, apparently this is something that has been a bugaboo of his for a while now. So, if you're looking at people that might potentially vote the other way as to what you might assume, then Clarence Thomas might be in there. Roberts has surprised us a ton too.
Yes, yeah.
So, I mean, like, it wouldn't shock me if that went the same way as well. I would imagine, though, that Kavanaugh and Gorsuch have to continue their blood oath to the president and do whatever he would want.
Roberts, to his credit, has been very much about the bad apples doctrine, I suppose, where he's just like, I'm not putting in protections for bad cops. No, if you can't get a search warrant for this, you had no reason to be there.
Yeah.
And while others on the court have been like, what? It's a cop. Let's just trust what he says. I get pulled over by them all the time with beer in my car, and they don't do anything. I don't understand what your big...
It's always amazing to me when, especially like when I was looking into the gun trace task force stuff, where it's like... one Supreme Court decision where it's just like, okay, it's all right for an officer to walk up to your house, put the key in the door, open up the door, and walk inside the house. That doesn't violate any kind of search warrant issues. And it's just like, as soon as you tell a cop that's like a loophole in the system, guess what every cop starts doing? Exactly that. And that's part of
what every cop says that they did.
Yeah.
Not whether they did it or not. But they're like, oh, this is the story I always tell.
Yeah.
So before we get into the last topic of the night, Corey, I just want to take one more opportunity. Still burning. All right. Still burning. So as promised earlier in the episode, I want to make sure that we touch on the issues of martial law, the Insurrection Act of 1807, and the Posse Comitatus Act.
Yes.
So if you are all right, I will take the lead on this section, and then we can discuss after a little bit of explanation.
Yeah, well, first let's just set up. I assume people have seen it by now, but it happened just a couple hours ago, so maybe people have missed it. Trump had a Rose Garden address, which he didn't seem to care about at all. Like he was just going through the motions on that one. Made special mention of the Second Amendment and protecting the Second Amendment, even though people were exercising their First Amendment rights not too far away from him. And while saying that he is a champion for peaceful protesters, had peaceful protesters hit with tear gas and rubber bullets and pepper spray and the whole lot. And then he had them all moved out of Lafayette Park so that he could take a photo op in front of St. John's Church, which is right on the other side of the White House, and has been there since the early 1800s. And it's like a very famous church for presidents to go to because it's so close to the White House.
When they go regularly,
yeah.
When they're good Christians.
Right. The ones who actually are, devout. But he goes over there, he holds his Bible up, which I'm sure somebody had to run to Borders and go pick up for him.
One correction, he was asked specifically, is that your Bible? And he looked at the reporter and said, it's a Bible. So we know it was not his.
It is now. So during this address, he said that if the governors are not going to step up and do the right thing, then he is going to use the U.S. military to help clean up the situation in these cities all across the country. He apparently had said something earlier in a conference call with all the governors, which did not go well. He's been promising protesters that they're going to deal with very, very vicious animals and unheard of weapons or something like that. Like everything he's saying is just like a little child trying to act tough. But
yeah.
there's a horrifying legal side of this too. So Rob, if you want to take it over now and sort of talk about posse comitatus and the Insurrection Act.
Yes. So let's start with this. Trump is calling on an 1807 law called the Insurrection Act in order to justify sending federal troops in their military status to the states. And the Insurrection Act of 1807 essentially says that if a state is overwhelmed, that the federal government can then go in a military function and offer police actions. And it's important they understand that. But I think that the more important thing is the interplay between the Insurrection Act of 1807 as amended. It was later amended in 1877. And the Posse Comitatus Act, which is essentially was passed at the same time. So a brief history lesson, not for Corey, of course, who knows all of these history things that I always bring up to him, but perhaps one for everyone else. The Civil War was actually the last open insurrection that we had when we talk about a country or a group trying to break away. There have been other times when the Posse Comitatus Act was used in conjunction with the Insurrection Act, most recently in 1992 in the LA riots. Before that, in the riots in 1968. Before that, Detroit Pennsylvania coal miners, Detroit auto workers, basically to send in federal troops where work needed to be done, and the local government was either unwilling or unable to do so. Most notably of these was Brown versus Board of Education, and asserting that, yes, these girls are the Little Rock Nine could go to their school, when George Wallace, not the governor of Arkansas, but the governor of Alabama, famously said he would stand in the schoolhouse door and did so, because he would rather be known as the racist that kept little black girls from going to school than the guy who, integrated the schools of Alabama.
Yeah.
So these two laws interact in a very important way. What the Insurrection Act of 1807 was in 1807 is not important. How it was modified in 1877 is. Essentially, to make a deal to close out the Civil War, that was the most contested presidential election. I don't know if you guys can hear the sirens.
Yeah, apologies to anyone who's listening to this. We're obviously dealing with some problems outside, so something's
going on in Hollywood. basically there was a deal struck. It's Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes. Neither of them had enough electoral votes in order to win the presidency. There were 20 contested votes, and they struck a deal where they said, if you end Reconstruction, we'll change our votes and make you president, and Hayes agreed. So after that happened in 1876, in 1877, they modified laws to assure that Reconstruction could never happen again. Most importantly, that federal troops cannot be used at a state or local level unless, one, under the Insurrection Act, there is an open insurrection against the state or the federal government. That's important. And at the time, Reconstruction was seen as, listen, you pacified us. We're back as part of the U.S. Now you need to get the federal troops out and let us police.
Yeah.
Which they weren't going to do. Jim Crow, which happened after that, was a huge sign of that. But the other part of that was you can only use troops if and when there's an open insurrection. But if some local issue were to arise and the local and state authorities were overwhelmed, then you can, in fact, send in federal troops as a military unit, not as a police unit.
Yeah.
However, they would be basically doing police actions. And Posse Comitatus, which was passed at the same time, essentially said that it wasn't the National Guard, but now we call it the National Guard, would instead be activated, where a governor could ask for federal troops to be made available to him. They would be activated at the state level and under the control of the governor, and the governor could then cede control to local authorities like the mayor of Los Angeles. And it would have basically just add additional bodies to the fight, so that we saw it in Baltimore in 2015. Literally, they were just patrolling the Inner Harbor, and it was like, well, no one's going to act up because there are 19 Humvees between Light Street and the building at the end of the Inner Harbor, so no one's going to act up. It's a show of force.
Right.
The difference is what Trump is claiming now is that he will rule the governors, and this is an important kind of facet of it. In 2008. There was a secret amendment to the Insurrection Act, which includes the Posse Comitatus Act, passed by a still unknown congressman, or offered by an unknown congressman, and passed by Congress, which said the president does not need the authority of the governors in order to come in. And as soon as this hit the Federal Register, all 50 governors got together and said, no. And I think the honest to God answer to this is they were more worried about how Obama would use this than they were worried about how Bush was going to use it in his last year. So they rolled it back. And now we are back to the 1876, 1877 version of the law. That requires that the governor request federal troops. The president cannot send in troops unless they are requested by the governor, or that people are in open insurrection and have usurped the governor or the local authority. Now, burning a police station does not qualify. If in California, protesters who are organized, and they're not, swarmed the governor's mansion and the state house in Sacramento and basically kept the government from functioning, then the president can send in troops to quell the insurrection and essentially put the governor back in control. And then they have to withdraw. Yeah. That's the rule.
Or they have to start taking orders from the governor.
Yes. Or the governor would say, I'd like you to stay. We're going to activate you as National Guard troops. You are now under my authority, not the president's.
Right.
The important thing is the president does not get to decide anything because the president is not here on the ground. The last time it was used in more than one place was by Lyndon Johnson in 1968 between April 5th and April 7th, where Detroit, Baltimore, and I think 2 other cities, federal troops were sent in. And essentially, the president, Johnson, felt as though the city and the state were not being truthful about how bad the situation was, and likely he was correct about that. But once the troops were there, then those local authorities were like, well, since you're here, we're going to activate you as National Guard troops, and we are going to have you as police. So although the action was under the Insurrection Act, it was later like, well, we meant to call you guys all the time. So Posse Comitatus, you can come in and be National Guard now. So the president is doing something unprecedented and unpresidential, honestly. But essentially, and this kind of gets back to more of a discussion, he is acting like a tin pot dictator. And this is really what he wanted all along.
Yeah. Well, I mean, another part of the Posse Comitatus Act, which is the federal, the military can't be used as like a police force. Essentially, that's part of what was established there, because they didn't want the military. I mean, like, this was sort of more thought out in foreign terms, but they didn't want like the military to go and arrest Saddam Hussein and bring him back to America. There needed to be a delineation between sort of like a police investigative division and a military division.
They also didn't want what we're seeing and hearing in Minneapolis. There was a report from a National Guard trooper there who was like, listen, I've done 2 tours in Iraq, and now you're asking me to police Minneapolis. The only experience I have policing was in Baghdad.
Yeah.
And the rules of engagement are slightly different in Minneapolis than they are in Baghdad. Now, funny enough, and not really funny sad rather than funny haha, but there was a tractor trailer that was apparently like bounding down the freeway towards protesters, and the National Guardsmen took it out by shooting the engine block, which is something that they do in Baghdad when someone is about to run the corridor. So sad but true, they were able to use those skills to protect the protesters. No one was hurt. But that's what they are avoiding. Like, we literally have almost no National Guard troops who have not served in Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere overseas. And those guys have no idea how to be police, except for to be police in a place where the rules are a little more flexible about, killing people.
Right.
And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. We delineate between what happens at home and what happens everywhere else. Essentially, what the president is arguing is, Democratic governors, if you don't raise yourself to my standard, we are bringing back Reconstruction. And I'm going to put federal troops in to make sure that my will is done in your state. And that is just not going to fly. And you said you were looking for a release, a pressure break.
Yeah.
That ain't it. Because let me tell you, people on the street hearing that the president's about to send in federal troops, you want to see guns in the street? You want to see guys on the far right, even further than Trump, and guys on the far left, even further than me, start to get together and agree on shit? Bring federal troops in at the state level and see what happens.
Not only that, just the mention of bringing troops in like that made me want to go out and protest. So, I mean, like, I'm already kind of losing it with Garcetti and his curfew shit, but it's been hard for me to sort of hold my tongue on this shit a little bit, and what really worries me is, we're not going to see each other for another week here on the podcast, and I'm just worried what else can go wrong between now and then, because Trump's the looting starts and the shooting starts was the first really bad moment of him trying to get involved in this, and then his address in the Rose Garden today while protesters are getting pushed out for his photo op, which apparently was happening because he was so embarrassed that they had to send him to the bunker the other day, that he wanted to like be out in the open and show that he's like not hiding away kind of thing, or that he's a big tough guy and has the police take care of protesters.
But couldn't be there with the protesters. Made sure that they got out. Get them out of here, and then I'm going to be the big tough guy who comes out of the White House.
Think about this: if you're the leader that this moment needs, if you would go out there and talk to people and they would listen to you. If Trump went out and tried to address the protesters, he would never get in a word in edgewise. If Obama went out there, I feel like there would be at least some percentage of people who would let him try and speak.
There would be at least a fight.
There would be an attempt at a dialogue, at least.
Yeah. I mean, the crowd would police itself. Like, hey, he's not our enemy. Shut up. Let's at least hear what he has to say. Yeah. You're not going to get that no matter what right now from Trump. And more importantly for the Secret Service, there's a high likelihood that something very bad would happen while he was out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stones and a lot of bottles and a lot of stuff being thrown around. So who's to say? And basically that's why they had to clear it out. But never has the hypocrisy been shown so clearly as CNN showing the president talking about being friend of the protesters on one side of your screen, just like me here. And then on Corey's side of the screen, you see tear gas being tossed at protesters to clear Lafayette Park.
Yeah.
But you asked, how's it going to get worse? There was a cop killed in Sacramento or Oakland, and incidentally related to a protest, but likely not. Likely somebody who was looting and then got caught and then shot the cop to try and get away. More police dying, that's going to escalate. More protesters dying, that's going to escalate.
I worry that it seems like Trump took the weekend off because the looting shooting comment did not go well. And people, even Lindsey Graham on Meet the Press was just like, I don't agree with that statement, which is that's about it. That's about as off the chain as Lindsey Graham gets these days when it comes to Trump.
Yeah.
And I just worry that tomorrow Trump is going to wake up and try and fix this situation again and just make things worse all over. Like, my number one concern for the last couple days has been, what is Trump going to do to ruin this situation, to make this worse? Yeah. And today he took a very valiant attempt at trying to make this way worse. And I think that if he continues to push along this same sort of talking points, he's going to find himself. I don't even understand, like, at this point, Trump has to realize he's got to expand his base a little bit, right? Like,
no. The irony, and I don't want to get into side stories because we wanted to focus this week, but the Trump campaign and the RNC sent out 2 flyers this week. One of them said, voting by mail is a fraud. And the other one, to their base, was, make sure you vote by mail. Yeah. Like, it's the irony that he thinks if he can disqualify enough voters and his people definitely vote, that he can win only on the backs of those voters.
I just can't. I don't know.
He's not listening to advisors on literally anything. You think he's listening to them about the election?
I tell you that, we didn't get to it at all this week, but the one thing that really kind of makes me nervous about all the protests that are happening right now is what will this is going to be our first test of what crowds and coronavirus do, because there are a lot of people who are not keeping distance. There's a lot of people not wearing masks. There's a lot of if you're yelling at somebody, then you're more likely to project spittle or something like that in that case, which I'm sure is not great for the situation that we're in right now. No. I worry
and how do
that
you contact trace?
A week from now we're going to have a really bad string of cases.
Yeah.
And everything that we did to try and flatten the curve and, like, stay at home and get back to normal life is all going to be for naught, because we're all, and not that it's hard to say wait until the coronavirus is over to protest your problems. Right. Minnesota could have not killed George Floyd, and we would have not been in this situation. So
yep. Well, I think the ironic thing is, as much as he has been chastised for his handling of corona, if you're looking for a pressure break, half the protesters coming down with corona and having to go back home, that might be the pressure break. Trump may end up thanking corona for pushing down the pressure and kind of calming things down before this is over with.
Just wait until he thanks corona, and then Anderson Cooper does 45 minutes of, I can't even believe it, this fucking guy.
And I am a little upset that you spoke that into existence, because that may be, in fact, what happens.
Yeah.
Someone may mention to him, like, well, sir, you really have corona to thank for this because it sent a bunch of the protesters home. And next thing you know, he's out in front of a microphone and just brain to mouth, no filter.
I do
thank corona.
I do enjoy that there's a part of Anderson Cooper which has just become detached from the... Like, today, he was just like, I was having a good day. I just wanted to read the news. Now you're hitting me with this shit, and I don't even know if I want to do it anymore. Like, it's like he's breaking in real time.
Chris Cuomo is the guy that the more you punch him, the more he gets angry and wants to hit you back. Anderson Cooper's the guy that, like, you hit him, and all of a sudden he's like, I'm going to take my ball and go home. I don't want any part of this anymore.
I'm a Vanderbilt, goddammit.
I don't need this shit. I got family money. I don't need this fucking job. But yeah, so I guess we'll have to reconvene next week and see where we stand. We may or may not be in studio next week. I guess we'll see. It would be almost unprecedented for 14 days of violence and curfews. So
yeah, that would be a new record for our lifetime at the very least.
yeah. I mean, other than Occupy, which I think was a different beast. It was about being there and staying there. This is marches. This is getting your voice heard. I think it would be an unprecedented event for marches to continue for 14 straight days. So I guess we'll have to see. But the important thing to keep in mind is that whether they're marching this time next week, we're not going to solve the problem by this time next week.
No.
And so that will continue to be, although Corey and I may move back into talking about Corona or talking about movie theaters reopening, which we're both super excited for, or possibly barber shops being open again, which I don't know. I'm super excited for. Despite the fact that we may move on and talk about whatever topic of the week is the topic of the week, we recognize as a unit the systematic nature of discrimination against people. We stand against it. Our unified message is that Black Lives Matter and that something needs to be done about the systematic racism that continues to plague our country.
Yes, absolutely. And the broader issues of inequality that extend beyond that as well.
I wasn't going to rope you into all of my communist, egalitarian nonsense, but if you want to rope yourself in, then yeah, sure.
For that sort of stuff, you want to go to our robertandcheek.com. For the good stuff, though, OTheAnthem.com. Corey to OTheAnthem.com. O The Anthem on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the listener line, 443-219-7595.
What's that number again?
443-219-7595. And you can find more of me on my website, CoreyBakerFilmmaker.com, Facebook.com/CoreyBakerFilm, and at Legends5 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I have a new review for Uncut Gems out right now, so you can go check that out on YouTube and Facebook and all fine social media. And yeah, that's about it for right now.
All right. And of course, you can find more of me at Robert N. Cheek on all your social networks. Do make sure that you check out robertandcheek.com. It's coming along slowly but surely, but you can find links to YouTube channel, youtube.com/RobCheek, where you can find the Everyman movie review. Up this week has been The Lovebirds. We have other ones up. I didn't get up an episode this weekend. It has been an insane weekend, just like it was last weekend. So more reviews coming. Keep an eye out for those. Some older movies as we close out quarantine. On robertandcheek.com, you can also find links to the books, which are available on Amazon.
Buy Rob's books.
Thank you. And a link to all the stuff that I'm doing. You can find all of that available there. So,
All right. Well, I think we've done good here today.
for a change, I would agree. But just for history's sake, I'll say we've done something.
Should we check live on the scene there? Well, that's not good.
Yes, we've done something. I don't know if it's good. But as always, you are listening to the O The Anthem podcast, part of the O The Anthem digital network. For Corey, this is Rob. Have a great week, everybody.
Now I got to get out of here because I am sweating balls off.
Woo, boy, it's hot.
It is ripe in here.